Margaret Lescan Corla. Minister, during the week the news of the derogation is welcome, first of all, but in my opinion the real work starts now, because unfortunately unelected bureaucrats in Europe have put in a proviso that over the coming years, because of the Habitats Directive, to put it very bluntly, basically screening out and what a cow does in a field and the impact on, be it the Barra, the Nore, the Sewer, the Blackwater, the Owen Reef, whatever river you talk about. And this is going to cost millions to this state, first of all. I don't know, is there going to be enough of scientists to be able to do all this in the timeline? But there's a bigger, wider problem, Minister. You'd have seen it, as indeed Minister Morden would have seen it, in the line of flooding. First of all, the objections, but the way the Habitats Directive is being used to block people. We see now that if you're trying to extend a port, if you're trying to extend an airport, if you're trying to extend or do a road, if you're trying to build a house, I see young people in my area that are 40 miles from Lough Corrib because the sinking river goes into the River Clare and goes on to Lough Corrib. You have to start spending $2,500 to go building a house in a rural area in case you may, is the word, have an impact on the site. We see in Minister Harkin's constituency, go back a few years, where a snail that didn't exist in Loch Talt, where it was holding Irish water up from providing water to people, 9,000 or 10,000 people in that area. And Minister, this cannot continue. It's blocking a government, first of all. Your hands are tied. If you look at Lough Finchna, you've dealt with it as well. And if a government trying to make progress, be it building houses, building roads, whatever infrastructure you are trying to do, and indeed councils, and indeed private people or private investors at the moment are all being blocked. This legislation started off in 1997, but the ECJ kangaroo court, I would call it, the interpretation it is using of the Habitats Directive, aided and abetted by NGOs that's funded by the state, deciding to try and wrap the state up in knots. It cannot continue, and I do commend Minister Callaghan, he's over there, yesterday in Brussels, where he spoke about how the ECJ interpretation basically in the line of immigration and all of that is becoming a problem. And I believe that as a government, if we want to make progress, and if you want to make progress, be it in housing, be it in roads, be it in all the major infrastructural projects, that ministers in the Council of Ministers in Europe will have to get together. We are well able to come in here at times and Europe send over more legislation on top of what we have already on whichever item we're talking about. They're able to always add more. But no one ever talks about, was there a mistake made? Has the Court of Justice interpretation, has it gone too far? And are we now prioritising basically a snail over people to be able to drink water, live in a house, have a port, have an airport, or farm their land, as what's happening at the moment? We are starting on the derogation farmers. We are starting on the derogation farmers, but what will happen? They will drive it down to the ordinary small farmer in this country. Thank you, Chair.
Don't point the finger at me. You have a time slot. Respect it. Minister.
Thanks, Les Corla. And first of all, can I just say, Deputy Fitzmaurice mentioned Lough Finchna there in his intervention in County Roscommon, and I know that area intimately well. You know, for all of the wrong reasons, unfortunately, the poor, misfortunate people there had to put up with years of torture, for want of a better word, because an attempt by the Office of Public Works and Roscommon County Council to try and relieve the situation with regard to flooding there was being held up and objected to. And the instruments to which Deputy Fitzmaurice refers, particularly the Habitat Directive, was the principal objective, or the principal instrument. Now, I know Minister Moran has made huge progress in this area, and I think that this will probably be one of the first Christmases that those people have down there, where at least they have pumps running and they have the knowledge of knowing that that terrible situation isn't going to happen to them on Christmas Day again. But the wider point to which you make, I agree with in terms of EU simplification, and so does the President of the EU Commission. like one of the hallmarks of the President of the EU Commission's contributions to the State of the Union address was the need for the Union to look at EU simplification. Now, I don't believe that it was ever intended that such an instrument as what was originally designed to protect the habitats of flora and fauna was going to be used as an instrument or a method to allow sewerage to flow through people's houses, regardless of the town or the village, for instance, where the flood relief scheme was to take place, or regardless of whether there was potable water. I remember back in the 90s or early 90s, we all do, the situation with the Galway City water scheme. And Galway City Council, I think, were the first local authority, indeed the first agent of the state, to use IROPI. Now, the Minister or the Deputy will know exactly what I'm talking about, where when there's an overriding need for the public good, you can actually try and, as he says, screen out things that would otherwise not be looked favourably upon in an application. But that's a long, arduous process, and it can be appealed. And I agree with you that, like, in terms of our infrastructure, whether it's in the building of a road, railway, the laying of a water main, I mean, we're talking about a water main from north of Limerick to Dublin, all of these things are being objected to by people for spurious reasons in many cases. But the one time that you mentioned the word, the Aarhus Convention, you know this as well as I do, you have carte blanche to get right the whole way up to the Supreme Court. Now, there's an awful lot of people in here, Deputy Fitzmaurice, who don't agree with my analysis and don't agree with your analysis. And that is another problem. And like if legislation was brought before the Dáil tomorrow in terms of harmonising or simplifying Ireland's interpretation to the Habitats Directive, I'm not so sure that everybody who claims to be on the side of what you're talking about and what I'm talking about would all of a sudden jump to that. And certainly when it comes to the European institutions, we definitely know that's not the case. But look, in general, the point that you're making around EU simplification is a matter that the Minister for Agriculture, Minister Moran and myself and others entirely agree with.
Deputy Fitzmaurice.
Minister, I welcome what you have said, but the reality is so fair, and unfortunately I have lived through a review of the Habitats Directive where I was invited to go into it, and to be honest about it, I was as well off I went home counting the cattle, because I wasted a day within a review of the Habitats Directive, because all there was, you were allowed to speak for a few minutes, and after that, good luck and good night, and nothing ever became of it. That's been quite, I done it a few years ago, I was asked to do it. And the sad part about DCJ as well, and this needs to be looked at, I see a case at the moment where I asked that we'd give evidence of a background to something, and we wouldn't be even allowed to put in the paperwork towards it when Ireland is being taken on. And, a person that would have knowledge of it. I would ask you though, and I know you talked about all the different places, it's holding jobs up 6, 7, 8 years. I know Minister Morton this is the first winter in Lochfinchina. I understand all that, and I welcome all that. But the problem is, for housing, for all the different projects in the country, we are now at a stage where it's 7, 8 years, you're going round in circles, and it's aided and abetted by NGOs that the government are funding. That's the reality of it. Look at the case that's going on at the moment, where in the line of the derogation, aided and abetted by NGOs. So we either decide to pull the plug on them, on the funding they're getting, as well as going to Europe to explain to people that people have to live, and that we have to change this legislation for the betterment of people.
Thanks, Lasky Corla, and thanks, Deputy Fitzmaurice. And I omitted to say in my original response, I think Minister O'Callaghan was, during the week, was not referring to the ECJ, but referring to the European Court of Human Rights. But I know the point that you're making, which is the same thing, and it is about EU simplification. And whether it's in relation to potable water or being able to flush the toilet, it is taking too long. It's not a shortage of money. Anyone would tell you that in most cases, the delivery of infrastructure now has inbuilt into it a substantial amount of legal fees, and an awful lot of the legal fees are being absorbed by cases that are being contested in the courts over environmental regulations. And I don't believe, to be honest about it, that those regulations, the same as yourself, were ever designed to be interpreted in a fashion to prevent people from getting access to potable water. And if that is the case, well, then it is time to go back and relook at it. And with regard to what you said there about the Nitrates Directive, I think this is a good week in terms of what has been achieved by the Minister for Agriculture, but it's about EU simplification. simplification. It's about making sure that a common sense approach, working with farmers and people who know the land and who love the land and who know their animals better than anybody, is able to have a manageable way to do it. And they're not people that are going to go out and degrade or destroy the environment.
Thanks,
they want
Minister.
to work with the environment because it's where they derive their income from.
Now under